It is 2 a.m. in Jerusalem, Al-Quds, and 4 p.m. in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. This is Press TV's World News. Well, the head of an Iraqi clerical association says companies affiliated with the Israeli spy agency Mossad are freely operating all over Iraq. Harith al-Dhari says the Israeli companies are particularly concentrated in the country's northern Kurdistan region. He says the firms are directly working with, quote, Zionist spy agencies. Dhari also says the Israeli companies infiltrating Iraq work under Arabic, English, and Turkish names. Reports say at least 70 Israeli firms operate in the war-torn country using proxy Arab or European companies. Earlier this year, Syrian customs authorities seized several truckloads loaded with Israeli goods heading to Iraq. Well, for more on that story, we're now joined by Mark Glenn, who is an author and political commentator who joins us on the line from Coeur d'Alene in Idaho. Sir, as always, thank you for joining our broadcast. Now, what does such news do for the argument that Israel had pushed the U.S. into attacking and occupying Iraq?
Absolutely. It is just one more huge piece of evidence, one more building block making the case that Iraq, the only beneficiary to the destruction of Iraq was Israel. The fact that she has as many as 70 firms associated with Israel's intelligence agency Mossad operating, and then particularly in the northern section of Iraq, where it can be used as a base of operations for causing problems with the Kurdish minorities in Iran, in Syria, and in Turkey. So absolutely this is one more piece of evidence convicting Israel of her deliberate and direct involvement in the destruction of Iraq, and I guarantee you it won't be the last news story of this type that we hear.
Right now, a lot of Persian Gulf countries have in the past been accused of having secret trade ties with Israel, and Qatar only recently closed an Israel trade office. Is Iraq a different case, you think?
I don't think it's a different case at all. In the first place, Iraq is a desperate country because of what has been done to it, courtesy of the United States. It has been absolutely devastated as a nation, and so the people of that country, and including the puppet government that is sitting in Baghdad at the moment, they really have no other choice than to allow some of these firms to operate in supplying the people with the basic needs that they have for clean water and clothing and medical supplies. And so, unfortunately, the Iraqi people, they really have no other choice but to take what is given to them in this regard, because they have no means of, as I said, of providing for themselves as they did under Saddam Hussein. So it's a very terrible situation, the fact that Israel and the United States go in and deliberately destroy this country and then use the destruction that they wrought as justification for coming in and supplying the people with the things that they need, of course, at Israel's profit.
Ronnie, you touched upon this. Iraq's many natural resources obviously make it a haven for investors who want to make a quick buck. Does a prolonged occupation then aim to divert this into purely foreign hands while leaving Iraqis with nothing?
Well, of course, as you found out with your own country in Iran, this is the Zionist way of doing things. This is the Western capitalist way of doing things, is to go into these countries where you have brown-skinned people, non-Western people, with great natural resources, and to exploit them and to drain these resources off for the benefit of the few investors from the West, and to leave the people with barely anything. It's no different than the plagues that we read about as retold in the Old Testament, that come through and literally devour a people of their substance. And the only difference between the plagues that we read about in the Old Testament and the plagues that we see taking place today is that at least today nobody claims that it's happening with God's permission.
All right, we'll have to leave it there for now. That was Mark Glenn, author and political commentator, joining us on the line from Coeur d'Alene in Idaho. Sir, as always, we appreciate your comments here at Press TV. It is 5:30 a.m. here in the Iranian capital, Tehran. Welcome to this edition of Press TV's World News. Well, the head of an Iraqi clerical association says companies affiliated with the Israeli spy agency Mossad are freely operating all over Iraq. Harith al-Dhari says the Israeli companies are particularly concentrated in the country's northern Kurdistan region. He says the firms are directly working with, quote, Zionist spy agencies. Lari also says the Israeli companies infiltrating Iraq work under Arabic, English, and Turkish names. Reports say at least 70 Israeli firms operate in the war-torn country using proxy Arab or European companies. Earlier this year, Syrian customs authorities seized several truckloads loaded with Israeli goods heading to Iraq. Well, for more on that story, we're now joined by James Morris, who is an Israel lobby critic who joins us via satellite from Los Angeles. Mr. Morris, as always, thank you for joining our broadcast. Now, it was reported as early as 2003 that Mossad had a presence in northern Iraq. Could there be a link then made to the fact that that is the one region that's seen a lot less violence?
Well, yeah, first of all, thank you for having me back on Press TV, and I'd like to wish all your Christian viewers around the world a very Merry Christmas, or Happy Christmas, as they say in England and in the UK. Yes, we know that the Mossad has actually been working with the Kurds, or at least Israelis, and we can assume that those Israelis are Mossad operatives, in Kurdistan, going back to Seymour Hersh's article titled Plan B for the New Yorker. And then we've seen the BBC story that aired as well, where you had Israeli Mossad operatives training the Kurds and developing an airstrip, according to the BBC report, for a potential attack on Iran in terms of any Israeli jets that attack Iran to enable them to refuel on the way back. But what I really think is going on here, and you can go to my America-hijack.com blog, the former Israeli Mossad head, Danny Yatam, had actually met with Mustafa Bassani of the Kurdish Democratic Party, and this is all about destabilizing Iran. This Mossad chief, again, former Mossad head, Danny Yatam, had actually said that our plan is to cause ethnic strife in Iran and bring down the regime. And of course, if you read my friend Dr. Stephen Snagosky's Transparent Cabal book, that fits with Israeli Likudnik Oded Yanon's plan of destabilizing Israel's enemies in the Middle East. And that's what the Iraq War is based on, possibly another Israeli invasion into Lebanon, and Iran along with Syria as well in the end run. It's very, very concerning, and we really have to address this and stop another war for Israel before it gets more Americans killed, more Brits, and even Iranians and Syrians and Lebanese too.
You just touched upon this, but I'd like to ask you anyways. In 2003, it was reported that a Mossad office in Kirkuk was attacked, but that U.S. troops had sealed off the area after the attack and implemented a news blackout. Did the U.S. attack Iraq solely for Israel?
Of course. Like I said, you can read James Bamford's A Pretext for War book. It was based on the clean break agenda. You can go to tinyurl.com/cleanbreak. You have these neoconservatives with the Jewish Institute for National Security Affairs and the Project for the New American Century, Richard Pearl, Douglas Feith, David Wormser, who used to work in Dick Cheney's office. Dick Cheney was associated with the Jewish Institute for National Security Affairs. You had Colin Powell, who'd said that the Ginza crowd was in control of the Pentagon. Obviously, through Ginza, PNAC, AEI, the American Enterprise Institute, associated Dick Cheney. He put these Israel Firsters in power in influential positions at the Pentagon, at the State Department, and even David Wormser had wanted Israel to attack Iran to draw Iranian retaliation against American troops in Iraq, so we would go to war with Iran. Fortunately, my friend Steve Clemens at the Washington Note found out about that and wrote about it, and David Wormser was removed from Cheney's office. He had to step down. But he was a co-author of this clean break document. So what I'm trying to say also is the war in Iraq, any war with Syria that could bring in Iran as Syria's ally, it's all for Israel. You've got these Likudnik neoconservatives in America who follow this Israeli Likudnik Oded Yanon. Fortunately, the Israeli Israel Shahak had translated the Hebrew and let us know about this, but the problem is the pro-Israel biased media in America is not reporting this, and we have to get this out as far and as wide as possible. I really appreciate Press TV doing that before the Middle East blows up as a result of another war for Israel. Again, go to America-hijack.com, neoconzionistthreat.com as well.
Right now, sir, it was once hypothesized that Israeli agents were killing U.S. soldiers in Iraq in order to enrage U.S. troops enough that the occupation there persists. Is that theory sounding more like reality now?
Well, we know from my experience with the head of prisons in Iraq, General Janice Karpinski, she'd initially told me that she had met an Israeli working with U.S. Delta Force interrogators near the Baghdad airport. So we know that Israelis have been working with our U.S. interrogators. So that's obvious. That's why we see the Israeli torture tactics, such as hooding and the sexual humiliation, like we saw at Abu Ghraib. Those are tactics that came down right from Israel through the neoconservatives who have friends in Israel that incorporate these kind of tactics via former Shin Bet operatives. And we never saw mention of this in American media. I tried to get CBS News to cover it. They refused. I finally was able to get BBC to cover it. And we know, Google it, Mossad, Israeli interrogators in Iraq. We know the Israelis are already operating there. We know that they are basically trying to use Kurdistan as a beachhead against Iran to carry out attacks by Kurdish separatists in Iran, as well as MEK perhaps. It's part of the plan that that former Mossad head talked about, this Danny Yakum. He said we want to use ethnic strife and violence to bring down the Iranian regime. And the main reason, as Steve Stogoski talks about in his Transparent Cabal book, because the Iranian regime provides resistance to Israel with the Hezbollah and Hamas. And Israel wants to take down the Iranian regime because of it. Bottom line.
All right, we will have to leave it there for now. That was James Morris, Israel lobby critic, joining us via satellite from Los Angeles, California. Mr. Morris, as always, we appreciate your comments here at Press TV.